with us this evening on the release of his book, The Lightless Sky, which is for sale, as you can see. So I encourage you all to pick up a copy after the event. In just a moment, I'll hand you over to David Loyne, who's our chair for this evening's event. But first, a quick reminder to switch your phones to silent. And when it comes to questions, please wait for the microphone, as we are recording live this evening. Thank you.
Right, is this on? Hello, 1, 2. No.
Technical issue.
Not operating. I'll start talking without a microphone, and it'll emerge. Apologies for the late start. The reason being that Gulwali is a busy man with an incipient political career and has just come from another event. So forgive us for late starting. It is a really excellent book. I thoroughly recommend it. But Jon Snow's done that already, so that's all right. But it's a rare insight into what it's like being a refugee that Nadine has told us, and we'll talk to her a little bit in a little bit. But firstly, just to talk a little bit about the refugee issue to start with, there are now, last year for the first time, the baleful landmark was crossed of 50 million people displaced in the world. It's now nearly 60. There are something like between 10 and 15 million people a year currently moving from their homes. And the second largest country now that people leave from is Afghanistan. It's been the first country for the last 30 years, and it was only knocked off that unwelcome top spot by Syria last year. So there are many Gulwalis in the world, as it were, and there are many Gulwalis in Afghanistan itself. There are some 800,000 internally displaced people in Afghanistan itself because of the churn of conflict that's gone on in recent months and years. I was until July of this year the BBC's correspondent in Afghanistan. I finished there after 2 years working there, and I've been travelling in and out of the country for many years, and I can see why. I mean, every Afghan family you meet says, you know, have you got your ticket out? How do we get out? From middle-class people to quite poor people. And in Gulwali's case, Gulwali Passarlay began life as a shepherd boy, which we understand when we read the book is a very complicated thing to do. He gets very offended along the way when people say, you know, you were just a shepherd boy, with his grandfather who he loved, and his father who became a doctor. And in Nangarhar, in the east of Afghanistan, his grandfather and his father and other male members of the family were shot by the Americans, which was the reason why his mother said, it's time for you to go. And I'd like to start with that, Gulwali. I mean, why did your mother send you out of the country? You and your brother, Hazrat, were the last males in the family. You were the hope in a Pashtun, in a traditional Pashtun family. You'd lost this grandfather you revered, and your father who had become a successful man, and of course you revered as well. What was your mother doing? Did she expect you to send money back? Did she expect you to disappear and never come back again, or to return to Afghanistan a better man? What was in her mind?
First of all, thank you very much, and thank you for giving up your time, and thank you to you all to join us here. I came all the way from Bolton actually today, so I'm glad to be here. To answer your question, I think it's quite complicated.
Bolton's nearer than Nangarhar, of course.
Of course,
it's a shorter
yeah.
journey.
True. To answer your question, I think it's not there is not a simple answer. So, one of the way I explain it is that there are ladies and parents in this audience that for mothers to decide to send her 12 years old and 13 years old son away to the unknown is hard. It's extraordinary, because I'm sure that she did not understood the implications and the dangers that I would face along the way, but also neither did I. I had no idea where I was going and what was happening. So the uncertainty was one of my main problem. And even now, we don't really discuss after 8-9 years. I don't really talk to her about the story itself.
You were just 12 years old at the time.
Yes, and it was really hard for me. Not only that she was sending me away, that I was afraid to go away. I was not afraid to go away, but I was more concerned and more angry for the fact that I was leaving the family back home, when it was my responsibility. It was my duty as a Pashtun, as a male, even though at this young age, to protect my family. So when my mother or my grandma and the rest of the family making a decision for me, it was a bit bizarre. It was a bit out of control. I didn't like it. I thought, this is strange, because I should be staying here, protecting my mother and the rest of the family, even though if that means giving up my life.
But you accepted it. And I suppose one reason that she was doing it was just because you would survive, because the Taliban were wanting to take you and your brother away and train you to fight against the Americans, and of course they knew that the family had a cause because your father had been killed by the Americans.
Great. Yeah, I think I didn't answer the full of your question. Yes, because of the conflict in the war, but also because we were a pawn between two games. So on one hand, the Taliban wanted us to become fighters, not only to take revenge, but also to fight the occupiers and the invaders. Because from a very young age, I was brought up that Afghanistan has been free before the Russians, the British, before that and afterwards. So it was something. There was this sentiment, especially being in a Pashtun and being my uncle being in the Taliban. I was actually willing to do that, to go and join the Taliban. And yesterday I was seeing a video on Al Jazeera when in Kunar, actually, or eastern Afghanistan, near Nangarhar, ISIL, Daesh, were training kids 6 or even 5 years old from like primary school age children, brainwashing them from this very young age. And I think it's hard for us to understand this idea of how, if you're a young boy there, they don't want to take a old person or person who is mature. They want to take, the younger you are, the better they can train you, the better they can brainwash you.
That's this terrible new threat to Afghanistan. We might come back to that a bit later, but at the time she spent pretty well the family's life savings on getting you out of the country, several $1,000s. And why did she trust the smuggler to take you out? I mean, that's an extraordinary moment. Was he a family friend, or was he someone she'd found?
This is the thing. I didn't know. So this was all done through networking, through family friends, through family itself. I didn't know how much money was paid until I got to Greece.
It was about $8,000.
$8,000. That I found that out when I was in Greece. So the system of the smuggling, which we explain in the book, is very complex and very complicated. In a way, it amazes me how organized and structured it is. Actually, it's more effective and efficient than the governments. The way they run the system, like I would
it's sort of cash on delivery, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I would be going from one place to another.
The smuggler, the super smuggler, doesn't get the money until there's confirmation that you've reached the next point.
But then again, that's
sort of on instalments.
True, but that's a bit fishy in a way. That how would they know? Because I haven't spoken to my family. How could they confirm? So it's about believing them. It's about, because you have no other choice. You are faced with very difficult circumstances. Those smugglers is the only hope that you have, and then you send your kids away, and then you just believe in them, and you just hope for the best. You don't want to hear bad news. So if they say, oh, they crossed to another country, or they made it to Europe, then that's a good news. Even though you haven't even spoken to them, you don't exactly know for sure that they have done, but you just had to believe in the kind of in their honesty.
What's the incentive for the smuggler to keep you alive? Because he's got to pay people all the way along the way. I mean, if you just ended up in jail or killed somewhere, that would be a good thing for him, wouldn't it?
No, really, because I have met people. I have saw people been killed or been left behind when they couldn't travel, they couldn't continue walking. People end up in prison. People sent back to Afghanistan or other countries. For the smugglers, it's important for them to maintain their reputation, to ensure that they're successful in getting people to Europe. It's a business for them. So if people get killed or people get arrested or they don't do their job properly, then people wouldn't trust them anymore. So this is words, I'm sure you understand in Afghanistan, words goes really fast. If they heard, oh, Gulwali is a great agent and he take a lot of people to Europe, then people will believe that. And then
Pashtun the code of honor is more important than any sort of international bank. It's the code, that's the trust, isn't it? That works. And you started off with your brother Hazrat, but you split up pretty quickly. What was that like?
Leaving home, leaving family was in a way dishonorable and immoral thing to do in my eye, but also I understood the implication of me staying or becoming a fighter or joining even becoming a intelligence gathering for the Americans or the Afghan forces. And then when I was supposed to be with my brother, and then mother is saying don't let up go each other, and then there we are in Peshawar separated, and then throughout the journey I was not only making my journey, not only missing home and things, but also I was looking for my brother. So I had a few things to do, no one. It wasn't just like I need to cross and I need to make the journey.
Well, you can't quite see it from there, but there's a remarkable map at the beginning of the book, which I can highly recommend if you don't buy the book, you have a look at the map, showing you exactly how they went and in order to arrive in Britain. And there are return journeys, which must have been pretty depressing. I mean, there's aeroplanes and buses and horseback, and you end up in jail, you get shot at. You enter Turkey, I think, 3 times in the end, because you go to Turkey, then it goes up through Bulgaria, back to Turkey, back to Tehran, gets sent back, almost back to the beginning, jumps, and then goes forward again in this track. And it's an extraordinary journey.
I think I say it isn't, because there are, as you said, there's thousands of other Gulwalis. I think it's just an ordinary story, but extraordinary in a sense there is no others. We haven't heard many others. I think there are people, Afghans or other refugees, with extraordinary stories, and they have been through more hardship or more pain in struggle than I have done. But it's just one of the example, and that's why precisely the reason I wrote this book with the help of Nadine, is to give it a human face and to say, look, those people who doesn't have a voice, we should give them a voice.
Now, some of the qualities of the people you met along the way, I think, are extraordinary. You split up with your brother quite quickly, but you meet up with different people who become firm friends, and you also get extraordinary kindness from strangers. I mean, of course you get beaten up and shot at and all the rest of it by the police, and at one point you're nearly kidnapped by sort of mafia smugglers who want to sell you on, and whipped. I mean, it's extraordinary stuff. But along the way, there's also the kindness of strangers.
Yes, I think in one way, the journey made me who I am today. And I always see things happening for a reason. Those friends that I have become brothers. They become brothers to me. And one of the things about Afghans I love is that you meet a stranger Afghan, then you just become friends. But because we were all in the same boat in a way, we were in the same journey, we needed each other's help, we needed each other's companionship in partnership. But because I was the youngest, I needed more than anyone. I was trying not to show my innocent side. I was always acting as though I was brave, I was strong, I didn't need their help. But those people that I met along the way, I will never forget them. They saved me in most cases. People like a friend of mine, Passarlay, all the way from Iran. He was with me till Istanbul, and then he was arrested. He's actually got into prison. He was sentenced to prison because of me and this other guy, because he was looking after us and taking care of us, and the police thought he must be an agent, he must be a human smuggler, and he will be a trafficker. So because of us, he got into a serious trouble. I think he was in prison for 3 months or so.
Do you know what happened to him in the end?
Yeah, he was released, and then he joined us in the second part of the journey, and then he was unfortunately he jumped out of the boat after 3 hours and was trying to push me too, but luckily I didn't go, and he was arrested again. But he didn't make it to England finally. He did, and I met up with him after some time when I arrived, and we were in contact for a few years. So there are some friends I'm still in contact with, some of them I lost contact, and those are just a few people that I met along the way that I remember, because in some cases I would meet hundreds, if not thousands, or in some cases even over thousands, or sometimes I would be on my own.
And there are, and you're shoved into the top of trains, and of course the boat trip itself, in order to get to Greece. You've never seen the sea before. Afghanistan, a landlocked country, never seen the ocean.
Thanks to Britain.
So yes, indeed. The borders all drawn in order to keep the Russians away from British India. My book, Butcher and Bolt, still available. Exactly, thanks to Britain. But you'd never seen the sea before. You end up on top of a boat that's sinking. What was that like?
I think when I see the news stories in the news, people drowning, like this year so far, 2,000 people have been drowned. This is the number that we know, the statistic that we know of. And I experience it. It keeps me awake. I feel the pain, and I know what they go through when they go to the sea. So for me, it was terrifying to see the sea itself. And then we had to wait 3 days, 3 nights, near where the sea was at the boat, because the boat did not arrive. Food ran out, water ran out, and then when we go to the boat, we were exhausted. And then there it was. The boat was too small, and as soon as we got on, the boat was literally, the water was coming in. And then when the captain started moving with 120 bodies on it. And then there was we explained in the book, there was this thing in the water, like a sim. This was like security fence thing kind of thing. It just came out, and it was the most frightening thing I have ever witnessed. I thought it was like some kind of big animal or something in the sea. Just literally hold the boat in the ring, and then the captain managed to come out of it. And then after 4 hours or so, they had to take people down, 20 or so people, and one of my friends was in it with them as well. But then it took us 49 hours before the boat break down. It wasn't moving, 3 nights or so in the boat without water and food, everything ran out, unable to go to the toilet, which was really hard. And my body literally lost moving because it went into sleep. Yes, I was the lucky one where I was in the top of the boat. Sometime I would be right next to the captain, but there were people inside. Inside there was a small place where they were screaming, so much smell. So this was the whole journey was difficult, but this was the hardest part of the journey, where what could have been sank within minutes if the police has not arrived.
Well, tell us a bit about what are human beings like in that situation after 3 days with no food and no water and drowning and potentially drowning? I mean, how do people respond? And they're all different nationalities. There are some Afghans, some...
Majority were Afghans. I think
Majority
probably
Afghans.
all of us were Afghans on this boat because they separated us, the Pakistanis, the Iraqis, because we were making too much noise. We were like, we need to go, and then the guy separated us saying, look, you Afghans never have patience, so just go, and then we were in trouble. So we were in this boat. We were alive in a sense that we were alive, but in actual fact, our body was dead, you know, without food, without having seen the sun or being in water, and being constant fear of drowning, or constant fear of being seen by the police or by the patrol, by the authorities, and being arrested or sent back. So we literally, I kind of lost sense of any sense, but also the people around me, everyone was thinking about themselves. But the issue was, again, we truly were in the same boat, and we were, as much as we thought about ourselves, but we were thinking about everyone else. There was no way that one person or two people can save themselves. So if we were supposed to save ourselves, all of us were supposed to save ourselves. If we were to drown, all of us would drown. So there was a sense of collectivity and collective decision making that, you know, whatever happens, should happen to all of us, and we are in it together.
Interesting. And then you arrive at better and better countries. Greece first, and then Italy. And Italy treats you quite well. Why did you move on from Italy? Why Britain? Why is Britain this great magnet for people to come to?
It's a great question. I think this is a very relevant and valid point that people ask me quite a lot, and I hope people will read the book and understand it in more details. But there are many different reasons. One was I was arrested in Greece. Of course, the police thankfully saved my life, but then put me in prison, which was usual by then. You know, this was like the 10th month into the journey. And the funny thing is, I talk about this a lot because they imprisoned me. They gave me a paper which says that I need to leave Greece within a month because I entered the country illegally. Now I understand it why, because this Dublin regulations that you have to claim in the first country, but the first country understands they will not get help from the Northern Europeans, so they just say, look, they encourage you to move on, and I think it's fair enough what they do. But because Greece at the time in 2007 was not as bad as the situation it is now, so then afterwards I found out that I was in prison for three months. And I was like, this is really logical. You want me to leave Greece within a month, and then you put me in prison for 3 months. It was really crazy. And then I had to leave because I had to leave. And then we were taken to either a UN camp or a charity shelter place. But we knew I still had the paper. Actually, I had the paper until I even arrived in Italy. Sure, before I went to Italy, before I left Passarlay, the Greece port, I met this guy. He was a human trafficker or agent or smuggler, whose name was Borat. And he told me, actually, probably he wasn't his actual name, but that's what people knew him by.
The film must have just opened about then.
Oh, yeah. Great. Ali G, I just thought about that. And he told me, it was very coincidental that he said he has met my brother. This was the only time after 10 months that someone has seen my brother and someone had information about my brother. Not only that.
Well, the good news is that your brother had gone forward.
Yeah, and then he had a picture of me. That was a bit shocking, and I was like, yeah, you have my picture. But because my brother had given it to him, saying, if you see this guy, you know, just tell him that I'm alive and I'm looking for him. This was a great news for me. This was something that I was looking for, and then that's where there was more energy and more. Yes, faith helped me to continue, but also, even in the boat, faith was one of the things keeping me moving in hope. But one of the reasons I continued even further was, but I need to find my brother. And then I went to Italy. Yes, I was treated as a child and as a human for the first time, which I'm very grateful, and I hope to get the opportunity to go back to that children's home and to thank those people who looked after me for 15 days. But that 15 days was kind of the longest day of my journey because.
But why didn't you stay and become an Italian?
I could have, but because I was looking for my brother, I wanted to find him, and then I found out that he was heading for England. But also the feeling of isolation, the feeling of, because this was the first time I was without friends or without travel companions, it was really boring, boredom, but also just days were becoming like weeks, and language was a huge barrier. They couldn't find me an Afghan translator. They found
is that the place? I think Nadine writes it very, very beautifully, that this is where you sleep in a room on your own for the first time in your life.
Yeah.
First time in your life, because you've always slept with your grandparents or brothers or in the house, and of course with all these refugees along the way, and suddenly you're in a room on your own. Must have been a surprise.
It was a surprise feeling. I think in a way I was grateful, and I showed gratitude that I was safe, and I had a warm place, and those people truly wanted to help me. But the issue was language was a huge barrier, but also there was this feeling of unease. I wanted to move on. I wanted to continue. Now I had more reason than ever to continue to find my brother.
But there is obviously this great sense of political concern in Britain at the moment, and many people wanting more refugees and many people wanting fewer. And and Britain seems to be the sort of the port of choice for as many of these people who can come here as they can. Well, apart from your brother, I mean, if you've been on your own, can you explain that sort of more sort of politically, as it were? What is it about Britain?
I think there are a few reasons why people want to come to Britain. I think whenever I talk to people who are right-wing and I say to them, look, if people want to come to your country and you're so proud of being British, it's great, because it's not something that you should be ashamed of. It's something great, because people want to come and seek refuge in your country, wants to claim asylum and want to be in your country because there are opportunities and hopes. There are the other different reason is this, that language is one of the main reasons people want to come to the UK, because English is an international language. Most people speak it. I was one of those who didn't. But I'm still learning, making progress.
You've caught up.
Yeah, it's my fifth language. Yeah, of course. I think it's easy to learn compared to Italian or other languages. And also there's this sense of connection. There's a historical connection, cultural connection that people have thanks to the British Empire. But I've been told not to be political. But also there's this idea that because Britain is the hardest to get to, so it must be an amazing place. Yes, it is, except the weather. But there's different reasons. The other is because people see I've met people along the way, they say, look, Britain is been heavily involved in bombing our countries and invading it. So not only does it have a moral responsibility to give us safety and security, but also we feel like it owes it to us. So there are different people. The majority of them are coming for the right reasons, they think, and also because they are unwelcome in the rest of Europe. So when I was in France, when I was in Calais, I was there for a month, and that month felt like 3 months. I believed in it for the last 8 years until the last minute, like literally on the 11th hour of the deadline. Me and Nadine sitting in this room in Gladstone, we had like charts everywhere about different months, different people, how much money I had. And then I said, look, I used to tell her that I crossed the border, it was snowing, and then we would look at the chart. It would say, it's not winter. And I was so confused because the time was something that I didn't have sense of. And then I realized, well, no, actually, I was only there in France, in Calais, not for 3 months, but for 1 month. And the police humiliated me every day and treated me so badly that it felt, this is how it was. And that's why people want to move on.
You were only there for a month, and it felt like much, much longer.
Yeah, of course.
You know? And this is the jungle. Talk a bit about the politics of the jungle. There's all these different groups, and the police come a lot. I mean, it's a very intimidating place to be.
It is. So when I was there, so every night, there was a place for lunch, to eat food, probably United Nations or some charities were giving us food. There were 2 places the police will not arrest us. One was this lunch place, which was near the stations. We will go there and spend much of our time there, have some warm tea in cold because it was November. And also there was another place in the evening where we could go and eat and the police will not arrest us. Everywhere else the police will arrest us. Sometimes they would arrest me 3-4 times a day. Actually not 3-4, but 2 times a day. Sometimes even 3 times, because I would be going to the police station, I'll be walking back, they will arrest me again because I have no proof to show them that I just came from there. So they have this kind of target. I just wanted to make you feel, so unwelcome and wanted you to continue moving on. Actually, the French police would, every time they used to arrest me, they're like, on the lorry in the port, they're like, next time. This time, no chance, but next time, like, keep trying.
Well, there is this slightly farcical moment in the book where the first lorry you break into heads in the wrong direction, and he gets out of it and says, "Oh, are we in Dover yet?" And then the police laugh and they say, "No, it's Belgium." So then you end up trudging back to Calais, and you do finally get to Britain in a banana lorry, which, and I may say, it's a refrigerated lorry. This man gets into the back of a refrigerated lorry. If they turned it on, you wouldn't be here today, and that happened to many people along the way.
Indeed, I'm very lucky. I'm actually very lucky. I survived and so much. I saw death with my own eyes. But in Calais, so in the jungle, we would travel at night to go to the parking space for the lorries to get on the lorry, and then sometimes they will take us down in the morning. And really cool. I used to beg the drivers, please take us to the port. The police will take us down because at least it will be warmer. So from the lorry parking place to the jungle would be like 2-3 hours walk, and it would be really cold and we would be really tired, but they wouldn't listen. But then sometime what would happen is we'll get back to the jungle to our small shelter, small tent, and then the police will come in the morning, bonjour, and then like they will arrest us again. I'm like, can we sleep? They wouldn't let us sleep. So it was really tough. And it was not as many people as it is now. So there were people kind of living in different parts. Now like they have, kind of Sudanese come, the Afghan side, and the Eritreans, and then the Syrians, the Iraqis, and now it's more shocking. I recently visited after 8 years, and I couldn't believe what I saw. And Paris.
The size of it.
the size of it, but as well as the conditions are really bad. I mean, that food place doesn't exist. The support that I used to get, because when I was there was only a few hundred people, it was manageable. Now it's unmanageable, and there is no way to get into England or to get into Britain, because there's, Britain has spent 30 million or so building fences, and it's people, everybody's hands are hurt, everybody's hurt.
Well, we'll talk about the politics of that and your life in Britain in a moment. But Nadine, I mean, Gulwali mentioned the writing process, and he talked about these charts and how you persuaded him when he said it was snowing that it can't have been snowing because it wasn't the winter. I mean, how did you write this story together? Tell me about the process.
We drank a lot of tea, I think.
Yeah, they
Very
got bored of
Afghan.
us.
You became a real Afghan.
They just give us the whole thing, like just take it, like.
Yeah. We were drinking. We went to a residential library. It's like a writers' retreat that I go to work.
Why did you need to go to that? I mean, you might have just talked to him.
We tried. So this is the third ghost-written book that I've done. And previously, when I've worked with subjects, Gulwali hates it when I call him a subject. Sorry.
She interrogated me.
Co-authors. It's been much easier because I've sort of been able to kind of grab interviews here and there. I've talked to people on Skype. But Gulwali will hate me for saying this, but Gulwali is still very traumatized.
I speak very fast as well, by the way.
Yeah. Speaks very quickly, but there was a great deal of trauma. This young man had rebuilt his life in Britain, learned English, as you can see, got to school finally after a battle with the Home Office to prove his age. There wasn't a happy ending when he arrived in the UK. He then had several years of battling the Home Office who didn't believe that he was only 13 because he'd been through this hellish year, so he looked older. So, having achieved then his life very quickly, got into school, passed his exams, got to uni, we then come along to start writing the book, and Gulwali has to go back to a very, very dark place that he hadn't been in for a long time. So it was hard. It was hard. And actually, what we did is we went away to this writers' retreat for several weeks, and I had an instinct that we just needed to be away somewhere very quiet. And we sat in an office. The library, the retreat that we worked in, it was actually given to the nation by William Gladstone, the great Liberal Prime Minister, Victorian Prime Minister, who was responsible for ending one of the Anglo-Afghan wars. So it was
fought the Midlothian campaign on human rights in the Northwest Frontier in 1879.
So it was quite fitting because there were some very long nights in our office. There was a portrait of William Gladstone bearing down on us, and you had a few conversations with him when you were delirious, by the way, because we were so tired. We had a big, big mug of tea. But it was,
I would love to have been there to hear Gulwali speaking to Gladstone about the welcome that he'd had. But you worked. I mean, when you say you worked, I mean, writing is hard work for anyone who hasn't done it. I mean, how were your days? How did it work?
We were
had no time.
Our editor Margaret's here, who cracked the whip viciously. So we were up, some nights.
She made us cry.
Several times.
She's mean.
She knows it now. But we had, some nights we were sort of averaging 4 or 5 hours sleep. It was a very intense process.
4 or 5 hours sleep.
Yeah, towards the end. Yeah, and it was because.
So you're working till late at night, getting up.
She wouldn't listen to me. I'm like, go sleep, and then she'll be on, and she'll be doing the wrong edits anyway.
Yeah, that's what tiredness is. No, the reason that happened, the reason that we were working up to the wire and such long hours is at the very end, and this often happens with people who are traumatized, at the very end, having kind of given me a piecemeal sketch, at the very end, in the final 2 weeks, Gulwali just had a rush of memories. Suddenly, and this is very common for people with trauma, it all came out. It all came back.
And then you remember the date, the month.
Yeah, suddenly you were remembering in minute detail. So I knew that we had a very special book on our hands. And Gulwali, I'm so proud of you because it was so intense, and I know it was incredibly difficult for you. And, at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, in fact, he was usually there before me, sitting there, having been through a painful day the day before. Gulwali would be sitting there the next day, and it was hard, but saying, come on, we've got to keep going, we've got to keep going. Because you had this absolute determination to tell your story, and more than to tell your story, to kind of explain all of the things that people don't know about this journey. And, I've been fascinated. I've been a journalist for 20 years now, and I've been fascinated by the story of unaccompanied children ever since I started my career on the Times Educational Supplement back 20 years ago, and I heard that word, unaccompanied child refugee. And I remember thinking, is there such a thing? Are there children who are sent halfway across the world? So it's a story I've always wanted to tell. So, for me, it was a privilege to be able to write this book with Gulwali.
I wouldn't have worked with anyone else. You were like, you're too good.
Oh, thank you. The only time we fell out though was we really fell out. Gulwali stormed. Yeah. Oh no, he's cracking his fingernails. Whenever he was cracking his knuckles, I knew I'd crossed the line. So it was that was a warning. But was the time we really fell out was Gulwali. I remember he came down one morning after breakfast and said, "Yeah, so yeah, I read those chapters last night. You have me crying again." I didn't cry. And I said, "Gulwali, you were 12. I think you probably did cry." "No, I didn't. I was 12, but I'm an Afghan 12-year-old. Don't cry." "Gulwali, all 12-year-olds cry. You were away from your family and your brother. I think you cried." "No, I didn't cry." "And take it out." And I said, "No." And he said, "Take it out." "No." We had a stalemate for about 2 hours, I think. And then we drank some more tea in the Afghan way and we sorted it out.
Yep.
So does he cry in the book?
He does, but not as often as I would have liked.
Well, it's his book. I mean, he's the author.
And that's the point, actually. That's the point I was trying to make. It is Gulwali's book, and that's why I was so proud of Gulwali. I didn't write the book for him. I turned Gulwali's story into words, and Gulwali absolutely took ownership of his story, which is why it was so incredible working together. It really was. And I think, you know, one of the hardest things for both of us, though, was, because obviously you were 12 and they were sketchy memories, was the timeline, working out how much money he had when, and also the stories of the smugglers. So it was brilliant that the lovely people at the Writers' Retreat gave us our own office. And the only way we could kind of make sense of stuff, we basically just stuck loads of pieces of paper on the wall. We had flow charts, because we also couldn't make sense of the whole smuggling ring, because it's myriad. So we actually wrote it down like a business plan. So we said, like, who is the CEO? Who are the senior management? Who are the kind of country representatives? Who's middle management? Who are the workers? And then we kind of wrote it down like this flowchart. And in terms of money, we kept losing track of how much money you had. Because it's amazing. His mum gave him a tiny bit of money, and his grandmother hid a little bit of money in his clothes. But you held on to that for such a long time, because actually the $8,000 that mum paid up front basically paid for everything. And at some points on the way, the smuggling system is so organised that Gulwali would be given pocket money to buy for his expenses, to buy a train ticket or to pay for food. So actually, the original money that you set out with, you kind of had till pretty much the end. I mean, you lost it all in Calais, I think. I forget. But you know, that was one of the most staggering things for me, was just this myriad sort of network, as I said, of these different agents. And the time I think he was most at risk, or any kind of refugee is most at risk, isn't actually when you're in the hands of the bigger guys. It's when you're in the hands of the subcontractors. And that's when it all starts to go wrong. So that's a myriad of drivers. That's the people getting you over borders. And, you know, they're ruthless because they've been paid a small amount themselves. They're usually quite poor people. Although there's a lovely, lovely story when you're crossing from Iran into Turkey for, I think, the second time.
Both them was actually good. Black Wolf was nice too.
Yes, Black Wolf, the sort of
Wolf,
Kurdish.
Extraordinary name for it. He was rather good. He was helpful throughout.
Very helpful.
He was an Uber smuggler. We enjoyed writing those stories. I mean, he's the sort of Kurdish areas. The reason that, you know, the Kurds are so sort of heavily involved in this human trafficking is that they literally inhabit these border areas between Syria, Iraq, Iran. Which are sort of stateless areas, and it's easy to move people through, and so it's kind of an easy business for them to have. But the story that touched me the most, I think, was Sebest and his family, who were poor people. This was in Kurdish-held Iran, and Gulwali had dinner with the family, with the grandmother, and when Gulwali and the small group of refugees were leaving to take this treacherous mountain night crossing on foot into Turkey, the women of the house held up the Quran, which is a traditional traveller's sort of, what you do of travellers leaving, you hold up the Quran and they walk underneath it and you say a special prayer. They did that for them. And the old lady had tears in her eyes because Gulwali was so young. And Sebest kept Gulwali alive that night. I think at that point you were so exhausted and that journey was so treacherous, you might not have made it, because some people, there were lots of different smugglers had their protégés, had their groups of people. People got left behind on that journey, as you know, and you were shot at on that journey. But Sebest stayed with you. He gave you a horse, in fact, to ride, didn't he? It was the first time you'd ever ridden a horse.
I gave him $25 as well.
Yes, you did give him $25.
Actually, it wasn't his horse, but he insisted that I take a horse. Otherwise, he said, look, you will not be able to travel. You will not be able to make it. But I think that was a very nice and kind
It's
thing.
amazing. This man gets on buses and planes and boats and all the rest of it, and then a horse is the thing that freaks him, having come from the mountains of Afghanistan.
Yeah, didn't like the idea of the horse. Yeah.
You make it very clear in the book that this was one of the scarier moments. I jotted down two things that you said along the way, which is sort of why you wrote the book. My home was a war zone. Did that make me any less human? And that sense of really wanting to humanize the stories of these people who otherwise are just statistics, I think is one of the reasons that marks this book out among many bits of sort of political literature. But you also say there are no good options in dealing with the refugee crisis. So how would you, if you were asked to go into the Home Office tomorrow and advise the British government, as you really want to do, he's a very keen young Labour Party activist, he'll be an MP in 5 years, what would you say, what would be the best policy, the most humane policy, and something that's workable? Because, it's my belief that Germany, who's now taken in about 1% of its population in refugees, that's going to be something that will haunt Angela Merkel. It's something that will it's probably too many people for the political nature of Germany. I may be wrong, and there may be many people in this room who think we should take that sort of numbers. But Germany's going to take about 800,000 refugees. One in 100 Germans, are new refugees. Should we take those kinds of figures?
I think there's no easy answers as I talk about it, but there are solutions. I think if we focus on solutions in trying to help those people, we will be able to. Yes, you can't take everyone, that's for sure. And what Germany has done, we need to put things into perspective. One of the things I say is that, for example, you people were born in Britain, which is great. It's an accident of birth that I was born in Afghanistan. It was not my choice. And I would have not left Afghanistan if it wasn't because of war. And a lot of Syrians or Iraqis or people who are leaving war zones, we know that Syria was a place for safety of Lebanese, Palestinians, Iraqis refugees. People leave because they have no choice and they're faced with really difficult circumstances. And what we should be doing is, it shouldn't be about the cost of money or this idea of being anti-immigrants and how we can't take them. Germany has taken more asylum applications this year so far than Britain has done in the last 10 years. One of my problems with Britain is what Britain should do. If I went to the Home Office, what I would do is, one of the things I would do, I would work with the rest of the European Union, I would work with the United Nations, not wash my hands up responsibility, say, look, we can't take everyone. Let's look at the cases thoroughly. Who deserves an asylum? Let's look at it. Who we should give refuge if they're really running away and fleeing ISILs and war zones, and how we can help them, and work with the rest of European Union. And it's not only I would say it's not even a European crisis; it's a global crisis. Britain is best at when it's on the table. When Britain is there working with Germany, France, and the rest of Europe in saying, look, let's have a fair system of distributing those people. Let's dismantle Kale camp. Let's have a place in the border states of Balkan where we process refugees, or even better, let's allow people to claim asylum in their third country, in Turkey or Pakistan or other places, through the embassies. Yes, in its political will, in its money, in its resources, it's doable. But one of the best things we should do, one of the most hardest things that we should be doing, is trying to find solution to Afghanistan, to Syria and Iraq. People will not come. And then again, those people who are here, I have yet to meet a refugee who doesn't want to go back to their country. Yes, when people come here, they contribute. Some people are very educated, some people have the skills and knowledge, but at the same time, there are no easy answers or easy solutions. But what we are doing right now is not enough.
Yeah, of course, the problem is finding a solution to Afghanistan. It's something we've been trying to do quite hard since 2001. We spent, the equivalent of the Marshall Plan and lost a lot of lives, British, Afghan, American, etc., in doing that. And there is this, there is this sort of rather bloodless thing that happens, rather cold and calculating thing that happens to Afghan refugees, which is quite hard now to get asylum in Britain as an Afghan. You tend to get sent back. And
yeah, there's a double standard. Like Britain has an agreement with
get
Afghanistan.
Sent back when they're 18. There's been a number of cases of that this year. But Nadine,
I just wanted
what
to
do you
make a
think
point.
we should do?
Before coming up here this evening, I was sitting downstairs talking to the photographer Giles Dooley. He's a brilliant photographer, and he's just returned from Greece. He's just returned from Lesbos, and Giles has worked in every conflict zone. He's been to South Sudan. He's been to Afghanistan. For those who know him, he's a tough guy. He's just come back from Greece. He had tears in his eyes tonight, and he said, Nadine, he said, you can't understand. He said, we were taking babies off the boats who had hypothermia, and the only way to treat them was basically we were turning the car engine on to warm them up. 2 babies died in front of him, and he's really traumatized by that, because he said, this is Europe. This is where I go on holiday. I'm used to going to South Sudan or Afghanistan and seeing people die. That's what we do. What I'm not used to doing is going to Greece and seeing babies die in front of me. And, you know, that is what's happening. The cold weather hasn't stopped the boats coming. You know, people are dying every single day. And it's in the heart of Europe. This is Europe now. This is unprecedented. I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that our leaders are sitting with their, really, are sitting with their, you know, sitting on their hands. Because I think, I don't know, do they want people to die? Because we know this is happening. Giles also described, you know, one scene, he said, the volunteers, they're volunteers from all over Europe, you know, of all ages, just ordinary people who've gone to Greece. And he described one scene, he said they were working round the clock, they're utterly exhausted, and they don't quite know what they've let themselves in for, right? They're just ordinary people, and they're going to come back really messed up by what they're seeing. And he described a scene that they'd sat down for lunch at a restaurant, and Giles, he said, also as a photographer, you don't normally get involved, they're the rules. But in a situation like this, he said he was getting involved. He was pulling people out of the water. But he described a scene, they all sit down for lunch, they just had their lunch served, and they just kind of were relaxing, and then they see another 2 boats on the horizon. Suddenly, you know, plates off, and they're all rushing out. On one of those boats, 45 people are still missing, and he saw that with his own eyes. So if I'm telling you the words of a hardened war photographer that has just come back from a Greek island, more traumatized than I've ever seen him, then I think that says something.
Let's take some questions from the room. I'm sure there are many. There's a roving mic. If you would speak into that and just tell us who you are. If anyone's got anything to yes, here in the middle. Because I don't think there are any easy answers to this problem.
Hi, I'm Maudie. I was in Lesbos working as a volunteer September to October, and I then actually travelled the Western Balkans route with first an Iranian family and then an Afghan family from Mazar-i-Sharif, which is a city in the north of Afghanistan.
Were you doing that as a journalist or a
no,
volunteer?
I was.
As
I
an
think
agent.
in the same in the same spirit as you,
She's
Gulwali.
Black Wolf.
I yes. Yes. Well, this is my cover story. So this is what I'm going to be telling. No. I think in the same spirit as you, I wanted to show that the numbers are not just numbers. Put a face, put a voice, and being born in Britain to British parents, I think an extra step is kind of transgressing that self-other binary that people often put down between Westerners and refugees. So obviously I spoke to a lot of, I don't speak any Arabic and I now speak a very small amount of Farsi. But I didn't have good enough communication to speak to a lot of people, but the ways that you can communicate without language are actually very incredible. And so I picked up a lot of information and a lot of emotion, a lot of feeling. But I really wanted to ask you what you think the implications are now, or how it might have affected your journey differently. Social media, because nowadays, during the current crisis, a lot of the smuggling, and as you said, you lost your brother, a lot of kind of family reunification happens over social media. So people will often arrive in one place and know where to go to meet smugglers, know the established routes where they are. Obviously, there are more established routes than when you were doing it 8 years ago now. But there are huge numbers of Facebook groups dedicated to the refugee route, and I wondered what you thought of those implications.
Great. I think first of all, it's great that you went back into to help and support. And I think this idea that we have privileges and we shouldn't be afraid to share those privileges and to help people. And I think, yes, great. I remember one day in Cali, cold evening, I had the dinner, and there was this guy talking to this girl, this lady, a volunteer, and saying, I hope you get to England, and then when you get there, please stay in touch. And then he's like, she's like, let me give you my email address. And then she wrote something for him, and I was wondering what email address was. Like literally, and I was like, what? So I knew the phone number, okay, like a phone number, but what is an email address? How could they communicate? I was really, really confused. So then this idea of social media, it didn't exist, or maybe it was, I wasn't aware of it. And I think it's great to see, I went to this welcome march where 100,000 people came out on the street of London to show solidarity, ordinary people saying, refugees are welcome. And I think I used to feel hopelessness, and I feel this anger and as well as frustration that why are not people coming on the street? Why are people not, pressuring politicians and government to do more in policymakers? But it's great to see that is happening. I think the implication of what's happening now, I mean, people are taking, because they see the government has failed, like there are a lot of British people are going to Calais, going to, like you went yourselves, and people are going to helping out in refugee camps in the jungle as well as other places, because I think people have this great sense of moral duty and responsibility and this sympathy and love towards those humans who are fleeing. And I think social media is a great help, but as well as it does cause problems too, because I have heard stories recently of like how people are getting in touch, like smugglers and traffickers are using social media, and how they could deceive you. You don't know them. Like it's not the way it was done for me. It was a very traditional way, and it was more trustworthy than it is now. So it's hard. Who do you trust? And then now you could.
But it could work both ways.
It could,
Because
yes.
of course there were real people you met along the way who turned out not to be trustworthy.
True.
I mean, I wonder if you were a 12-year-old Gulwali now leaving Nangarhar, you'd have a smartphone potentially. What difference would that make to your journey?
I think I get loads of messages recently, especially I visited Calais twice and I met people there, and I get so many messages from people in Calais, in the camp. And one thing I noticed when I went there, people didn't have food, but they were all charging their mobile phones and like and a generator, and I was like, okay. So I think it would be completely different now. And I again, I wish I didn't have to make this journey. I hope that no other Afghans or other people will make it. But smartphone and social media and knowing what is happening and what is coming. I mean, the thing is, people see these videos, how bad things are in Europe and crossing borders and being shot at recently. Afghans were shot at a Bulgarian by a Bulgarian border guard. But people know, because their situation in the countries is so bad. They're like, whatever it is, at least it's better than Afghanistan. At least your heads will not be chopped up by Daesh. And so I think if I had to make the journey now, it would be impossible. Like now, like if I had to make the journey now,
It would be impossible.
Yeah, it would be impossible. Like for me, in the suffering that I went through and the things that I have seen, and to make it again, it would be impossible.
Because, are there any more? Yes, at the back.
Actually, the way it's become easier. Say, for me, it took me a year. Now I see people. I travel a lot. I was in Helsinki this weekend, and I was in Brussels. I met Afghans, and they made it to Europe in a week. So people are making it really fast because there's huge flow.
Hi, my name's Adrian Matthews. I work for an organisation called the Children's Commissioner for England. Thank you, first of all, for your book, both of you. It's been an absolutely fascinating read. One of the things that really struck me is how resonant it is with, not just as a historical document, but what is going on today. I've got so much I want to say, but first thing perhaps is that the numbers of people currently in Calais is somewhat overblown. We tend to think of it in England as, kind of the major part of the European crisis. It really isn't. 3,000 people in Calais, another 1,000 in Dunkirk is small beer compared to the numbers that are arriving every day on Greek islands. Second thing I wanted to say is I think, Gulwali, your book can teach the Home Office and government an awful lot about the way they process and think about children, unaccompanied children who arrive in this country, and how they go about looking at their claims. I think some of the ways you express things, for example, around that you wanted to tell your story but you didn't feel safe to do it, and yet immediately children are slotted into an adversarial asylum system, expected to speak to a range of officials who they don't really know, can distinguish from one from the other, repeating your story all the time. And perhaps the most pernicious thing of all, having your age disputed and told that you're not believed about how old you are. And let me tell you that, if anything, things are much worse than they were when you first arrived. Using our own powers as Children's Commissioner, we looked at what's happening in Kent earlier this year, and between December last year and March this year, we asked for a detail of all the children, all the young people who have been claiming to be children who went to Kent. Over half of them are disputed about their age, and now, since the numbers have gone up since June quite dramatically, that's going to get worse because the pressures on Kent are simply enormous. And they haven't got the social workers. We know, for example, recently that there are up to 200 children in Kent who have not even been allocated a social worker, so haven't got a care plan, are sitting in semi-supported accommodation, and it's a real problem. And local authorities have to rise to the challenge and start taking some of the children that are currently in.
So Adrian, can I just ask you, because obviously you know about children, because Save the Children have been campaigning that the government should take in more minors, but you're saying that we can't even cope with the ones that are coming.
No, I'm not saying that. I think absolutely we should take
Or
in
we're
more
not,
minors.
and we're not dealing with them well.
Well, we're not dealing with the ones that are here well. No, we really aren't. Because if they land in Kent, they become the responsibility under the Children Act of Kent Social Services. That is an issue that needs to be a structural issue, if you like, that needs to be dealt with. But we also know that there are a lot of unaccompanied children in Calais who have family in the UK, and I cannot see why, with all the wit and resources and will of governments, they can't use the current Dublin regulations to ensure that those children can rejoin their families. We know a 10-year-old who's got parents in Manchester, sitting in the jungle.
Just to pick up on that, Kent is utterly overwhelmed. They've used up every foster carer they have, as you said, 200 children without a social worker. And then in that pressure, it becomes all too easy, unfortunately, for local authorities to just say, well, actually, you're not a child, you're 16. Or because then they don't have to have the same level of care, they don't have to go into foster care. It's a huge issue. And this issue, you said about Calais, that's insane. There's a 10-year-old sitting in Calais whose parents are in Manchester. Calais is, for me, one of the things that people in this country, when I talk to people, they understand the least. One of my friends said to me recently, but what I don't understand is when they arrive at Calais, why can't they just form an orderly queue? Why do they just have to be so, so kind of rough and climbing on things? And I once I put my jaw back up, and this was an intelligent woman, I'm not going to criticise because this is an intelligent woman. And I said, what is it you think they're forming a queue for, or could form a queue for? And she said, well, there must be some officials there. There must be people telling them where to go or what to do. And I said, well, no, there really isn't. There really isn't. The police kept arresting Gulwali, and then they send him back to the jungle, and then he tries to get on a truck, and then they arrest him again, and then they come and burn destroy the tents, and actually it's a game that's played in Calais. The French police know it's a game. Like so many times you said, the French police used to say to you, "Yo, bad luck, next time England." It's like a joke. It's like a sick joke what's happening at Calais. And there used to be an asylum processing centre there. But the British government made the French shut it down because they felt that it was attracting more people. But thank you for making that point too, because if you read certain sections of the media in this country, you think that there's an army of 1 million people amassing at Calais. There's not. There's 3,000 people. There's 1,000 in Dunkirk. The figures are actually not nearly as big as we've all been frightened into believing.
Well, no, and compared, of course, 86% of refugees and internally displaced people in the world are in developing countries. Not waiting at Calais to get here. Gulwali.
Thank you, and thank you for writing to me. We had a email communication. Now I know what email is. And I think it's good what the Office of Children Commissioner is doing. And I think the real issue is, for me, when I was in Kent, I'm still Kent had responsibility for me, and it's maybe before I had the Kent thing. When I went to Calais after 8 years, a few months ago, on my journey, as hellish as it was, I didn't cry as much. But when I went to Calais, I could not hide my tears. That's how bad it was. It was literally shocking. Yes, we could help those children, we could help those families, and we can help those people to come here or to distribute them in France. But the issue in Kent is that the government unwillingness to enforce other local authorities. We have thousands of local authorities across the UK and Britain to take children, because if you give them to Kent, they will dispute your age. And this thing about disputing your age, it ruins your life. Because if your age is disputed, you're not believed. I came to this conclusion with life after going through so much hardship that I wanted to end my life, because this is how cold the system was. This is how unfriendly. Yes, I was looked after. I was treated as humans compared to the rest of the world. But there was things like not believing in everything I said. They did not believe in that I was an Afghan. And I said this. This is the biggest insult that you can tell an Afghan that you're not an Afghan. I was like, everything else I can deal with, but I can't deal with this. So
the problem is that they've had thousands of Pakistanis who speak good Pashto because they come from the Northwest Frontier region, who don't have a right.
They're originally Afghans anyway. But yeah, okay.
Let's not go there.
Until 1893 because of the Durand Line. But they're Pakistani citizens, and they've thrown away their papers and they arrive here. So there has been quite a tough line on proving nationality. But I think failing an age test, which is what you did when you come here, having suffered all this at 13, and you know when you're born.
Of course.
Precisely.
Yeah. And that's the issue. I think this is the thing. I mean, yes, I understand there has to be a system in place to. I have no problem with cooperating with them and to say, look, to find out exactly who I was and where I came from and about the nationality and the places and everything else. But the way they were doing it, I would sit there, talk to strangers for hours. They would treat me like really humiliates me. But then there was no point. And then I would be in trouble because I haven't told the same thing to my caseworker or to my solicitor that I have told him. And then I'd be like, look, I had enough of you guys. I just don't want to tell you anything, like, because you wouldn't believe me. So there's no point in me telling you anything. And I think the system could get better and it should get better. And I think there are a lot of people who wants to help, even with the Home Office, with the social services, but can't cope with it on its own. And the rest of the UK, the government needs to intervene to help those people. And again, it's more people are coming because there's more people in Europe. And I think what we need to put into perspective is Britain is 23rd in the world for taking refugees. 1 in 10 refugees are in Europe. 9 of them are not anyone in Europe. And I think we should do more to support and help, Jordan and Turkey and other places, Lebanon, where 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people are refugees. And yesterday I was watching the news, there's flooding in Iraq where the Iraqis displaced people as well as refugees are living, and they're not getting much help and support, which they should from the international community, including Britain.
Yeah, I mean, just so for people who don't know, there's, we're talking about the Syrian crisis we can't cope with. Lebanon, 1 in 4 of the population is now a Syrian refugee. There's something like 1.5 million Syrian refugees in Lebanon, a very tiny country. How many are in Jordan, Joe? Can you help me? Okay, I think Jordan, a similar number, I think about 1.2 million. It is always developing nations, it is always the poorest countries that actually take the biggest refugee burden. That isn't something that you would know from the British media, but it's very important to point out.
Here. Yeah, well, you've got the mic. Yeah, go.
Hi. Gulwali, thanks for coming to speak to us tonight. I live in Afghanistan right now, and one of the most inspirational things I see is the number of young Afghans that I meet who are like, we're going to stay and fight for Afghanistan. Obviously, this is just in Kabul, where security is much better than the provinces. But is there any potential, would you ever consider reconnecting with Afghanistan or going back, or maybe inspiring young Afghans to stay and fight? Because that's one of the many criticisms, right, is that they're leaving and the government hasn't provided opportunities.
Amazing, thank you.
Well, he wants to be president, so yeah.
Yeah. I think, you definitely need to read the book. I love to go back to Afghanistan, and for the last 4 or 5 years, this has been my aim, with school education and everything that I've been doing. I've been involved with so many committees, commissions, and groups. I try to get experiences and expertise, and to go back, and I think it would be a great investment. I think I want to make not only Afghanistan proud, but I want to make Britain proud that what they have done for me, which I'm in huge debt in gratitude to Britain and to the British people for allowing me to stay here and for giving me a second chance. In this campaign, the young Afghans are running, Afghanistan needs you and stay. It's amazing. But the issue is there is huge insecurity. I mean, in Nangarhar, my province, used to be somewhat peaceful. Now there's Daesh, there's ISIL, and I mean the Taliban are somewhat, you could talk to them, you could you can communicate, but Daesh is no communication. They will chop your heads up if you go against them. It's unbelievable. So people are living, yes, there is huge unemployment, inequality, oppressions, but mainly because of security reasons and even Germany has started a campaign to say, look, don't come, which is kind of a double standard in a sense. They will take some, they will not take Afghans. And I think I have been working with Afghan youth in the UK and across Europe. I do a lot of traveling, and through social media, I discourage people to come, but I understand why they're leaving. And hopefully when I go back, one of my main aims is to ensure that young Afghans from Britain, from Europe, the educated one or non-educated one, to go back to Afghanistan. If we don't rebuild our country, who else would? And I think, I want to make sure that a mother will not have to send another 12 years old away to the unknown and to the risk that I face. So I have huge obligations, or I have huge responsibility on my shoulder that I feel like using my education and experiences to go back one day in the near future. I hope things will get better, security and peace, but I have to go and contribute to it, and I have to play my part. And I think as a citizen of, not only, I used to be very nationalistic and still patriotic, but I feel like I'm a global citizen, but still I have a more responsibility towards Afghanistan than anywhere else. Afghanistan needs me more than Britain or elsewhere. So being in Britain now, I contribute. I will do more as much as I can. I haven't wasted, for the last 4 years, I have not even wasted a day not giving back, because I'm so grateful for the opportunities that I have. But I definitely want to go back, and I will encourage other Afghans and empower them to go back too.
Another interesting point is you're often asked, are you going to bring your family over? You might want to expand on that, because you're...
Yes, I think I could actually bring my family here, my mother and my siblings, whom I've not seen for 9 years. And recently my little sister passed away as well, which was really sad for me too. It's shocking that she did that. I didn't see her for 9 years, and she was a little girl. She was only 12, 13. So for me, the sacrifice of being here, when people tell me to go back, I get these hateful messages on social media or on the comments and articles. I'm like, I love to go back. I want to be there. I don't want to be here, but I want to come to Britain as a civilized person. I want to come here to study, to work, with the proper means, proper documents. I don't want to be called illegal. I wish I could come in a different means, but this idea of bringing my family here, yes, I could do that, but I will not feel comfortable about that, because I feel like if every Afghan or every refugee brings their family here, then we don't have the same feelings or the same sympathy, or maybe we'll have the same sympathy, but we're not the same responsibility towards doing something there. So when there's a bomb blast, I live in constant fear for my family, but I think my family is not more important than any other Afghan family. If somebody is losing their child or somebody is losing their mother, my mother is, those people, when someone dies, they are somebody's mother or they are somebody's son. So because of my family there, I'm more obliged to go back and do something about it. So that is one reason I don't want my family to come
So the answer is no, you're not.
No,
You don't
of
want
course
to bring
not.
your family.
I'm really grateful for the question. I mean, I find the youth of, Kabul University, tremendously inspiring in the way that people talk there. But they're coming out of university and there aren't many jobs.
Yeah,
So it's really difficult. Can you talk a little bit about Hazrat, your brother, and then we'll take your question, because he did go back.
He's an interesting guy.
So you finally met up with him in Britain through a chance coincidence, really,
Indeed.
and then you were living together, and then he went back. Why was that?
Yes, when I was Rome, I found the guy who the agent told me about, and I found him. He took me to his house. He told me everything about Hazrat, and that's how he ended up in England. But I still had no contact, so I came to England. We found each other, which was brilliant, which was amazing. But then Kent wouldn't allow me to live with him, and Kent would literally, yes, let's not go there. But and then in 2016, when I officially turned 16, in 2010, I was my last year of school. My brother had to leave, even though I lived with him for a few months, which was good. After a lot of legal battles to be allowed to live with him, and then to challenge the age dispute and everything else, he had to go because I talk about it in the book briefly, but it's another complicated story. Is that my mom life was a danger now, and I've been asked this question sometimes. When you were coming, why didn't your mother came with you? Why just you? I'm like, well, sometimes women are not at great risk as well as boys are, because this idea of Pashtunwali and this idea of honor. So women are kind of looked after or not harassed as much, such as boys are in trouble. So Hazrat has to go back because my mom and my family life was a danger. It was an extraordinary decision for him to make. I was actually willing to go back too, even though what I went through, what I experienced, but still I was, because my mother is everything to us. I mean, if my mother is not there, what is the point of life? I mean, she sent us away to save us for our own safety. And I say this, she saved me, but she lost me too at the same time. So brother had to go back, which was really difficult. And then he went back home, and then he met everybody. He met the family, and then he got married, and then he got a child as well. He spent 3 years there, and then things didn't work out. He was kidnapped. He was taken to the training camp, and then literally he has to escape again, and he has to make the same journey, not only leaving mother and siblings, but leaving his wife and his child back there. And then thankfully he made it safely back to Britain, and now he lives with me.
So his wife and child are in Afghanistan.
Yep.
So and he made the journey
Twice.
twice.
Yeah.
So,
Hi, my name's Nadeem. Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah. I'm Nadeem, and all this talk of the dilemmas of people leaving family behind and whether to leave the country or not really resonates, because my father's family's from the north of Iraq, and last summer their town fell to Daesh, so they're now in another part of Iraq, and the lady talking about how they're taking over parts of, or becoming stronger in Afghanistan horrifies me. My question is, I'm hearing a lot of people in the political scene in Britain saying, okay, we should accept X number of Syrians, but the countries like Afghanistan, and to a lesser extent, I'm even hearing Iraq, they're not countries at war, so we can afford to be harsher on people and to toughen the rules on Afghans and Iraqis trying to get into our countries. I guess I know what you are going to say, but do you agree with that, and how does it make you feel?
Absolutely not. I don't agree with it. I think the problem is I hate the double standards. It's not only Britain, it's the rest of Europe as well. Afghanistan has been at war for the last, not only this 15 years, but the last 30, 40 years, as David knows, as all of us know. And Afghans have been drowning in the sea, and Afghans have been treated really badly. And there's some kind of agreements between Afghanistan and Britain before even the Afghan government came to existence that we will send refugee asylum seekers. And when you come to Britain, if you're an Afghan, you're most likely, there's 80% chance of refusals. Britain have a special program, a plane that takes Afghans back. If not weekly, at least it's monthly. And Afghanistan is as dangerous as Syria, as Iraq, and so does it Iraq. And yes, I completely understand we can't have everyone, we can't take everyone. I get the arguments from the other sides, we have our own problems, sure. But those people who are leaving, who are fleeing, you know, they're running away from wars and conflicts. And here we are, we're shutting our doors and saying, no, you're not welcome. Where are they supposed to go? What are they supposed to do? And those are the kind of people who will go and join the Taliban, will go and join Daesh. I know Afghans who have went back from here. They became resistant to the government. They joined the militant groups because they had more reasons to do so now. So I think when they come here through so much hell, you know, some of them sell everything they have to make the journey, to pay the human traffickers. And when they go back, they have no homes, no nothing. And there's a funny story that a few years back, British officials and some European officials, Swedish and others, they say Iraq was safe, that we can send Iraqi refugees back, or people who are refused asylum. They went back and they couldn't get into Iraq, so they stayed in Jordan for a week or two. They came back, produced a report saying Iraq is perfectly safe and Iraqis can be returned. So it was crazy that they went and stayed in Jordan because they couldn't themselves enter Iraq, but then they were saying and giving a message that Iraqis can be sent. So if we are treating refugees, we should treat them all equally and with the law and, you know, according to the UN conventions. And if we are sending people back, we should send them back when things are better. And I think people will go back themselves when things are better.
Nadine, you've watched this for years. I mean, the whole refugee issue, you've reported on it. I mean, you know, should we treat all these countries differently or individuals the same?
It's a really tricky one. It is a really tricky one because you know we disagree on this. I can understand why it's in the interest of both the Afghan government and the British government to say that Afghanistan is safe to go back to. But obviously every case, you know, under asylum case, I do believe every case should be taken on its own merits, whatever the country. One of the things that, you know, I had sort of struck me over the years, that I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan. I did a big investigation for the Mail on Sunday, probably about the time you were making your journey, actually, probably about 8 years ago.
Small world.
Yeah. And I remember being
Imagine what the Mail on Sunday would have said about Gulwali.
Oh,
no,
they did my
they
serialization.
serialised our
Yeah,
book. We loved them.
except that the headlines was a bit dodgy. Everything else was good.
Yeah. But I remember sitting in a barber shop in Kabul and talking to young men who were about to make the journey, and you know, and some of them were so incredibly naive. And there was one young boy, and you know, I don't know what his story was, but he was saying, oh well, when I get to Britain, I'll be a doctor. And now this was a young boy. It was barely literate. And he said, you know, the British government, they'll pay for me to go to university and be a doctor. And the photographer I was with was really losing her rag. She was going, no, they won't. Stay here, you know. But he wouldn't believe it. And I just thought, gosh, you know, there's so much kind of disinformation that the traffickers and the smugglers put out. And you know, and the naivety of some of the people kind of making the journey. And I do think, you know, it is a reality that on this journey, there are people who are absolutely fleeing for their lives. There are people who, you know, who are economic migrants. But I also think, you know, if a Somali fisherman can't afford to be a Somali fisherman in Somalia, then there's a problem with that, and that needs to be addressed too. Another photographer friend of mine I spoke to this morning has just come back from Somalia, actually. She's worked there extensively for the last decade. She said she's not going back again. She said it's the most dangerous she's ever seen it. She went to IDP camps, internally displaced people camps, where they haven't seen an aid agency in 3 years. These people have no food. The education system has completely collapsed, and she said the only schools she saw were madrasas run by Al-Shabaab. Now, you know, so we can talk about economic migrants not being as worthy as asylum seekers, but it's an issue we need to address, because if we don't, then, you know, it's going to come back and bite us on the bum. So I didn't really give you any answers there, did I?
I agree. I agree. I think it's important. We need to, you know, people who are running from poverty and desperations, it's injustice that we need to address the world system. You know, how 1% of population have 85% of the world. That's a problem.
And we're going to take a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap up and give you a chance to buy the book.
Yeah, I should pass that on, because that was my question. I wanted to move from countries of origin to this distinction that people talk about as if it was natural. Oh, we've got to separate the economic migrants, send them back from the refugees and asylum seekers. And I wonder whether you agreed with that, because I think it's not only a dubious distinction, but also one impossible to establish.
It is very dubious, and I think it's very interesting as well in terms of the sort of public sympathy. So, you know, there is an outpouring of sympathy for Syrians right now, and I think there should be. You know, and I think Merkel's actually, I know it's going to be difficult for her, but she's done a very smart thing by taking in this many Syrians. Syria was one of the most secular countries in the Middle East with a highly educated population. She's just got herself a big economic advantage. She's got herself a whole bunch of doctors, lawyers, you know, educated people. She knows what she's doing. She's not dumb. But, you know, Eritreans, There's massive numbers of them on the move. Eritrea is this sort of fascist dictatorship where there's torture on a daily basis. They're equally as worthy. They're equally as in need. But you don't have the same sort of outpouring of sympathy from the public as we do for the Syrians, and I find that quite interesting. Again, I don't have easy answers for it.
It's a big problem because then it multiplies the numbers, but at the same time I think there is no moral or practical possibility of distinguishing the sheep from the goats in that way.
There isn't, but if you take somewhere like Eritrea right now, Eritrea is so bad that nobody would want to stay in Eritrea if they could. Now obviously we can't just take the entire population of a country and put them somewhere else. So again, what do we need? We need renewed diplomatic efforts, and I think this is
change.
Climate change, just to scare you all. Everybody talks about a flood. So there are predictions that by 2050, which is only a few years away in our lifetime, by 2050 there could be up to 50 million climate change refugees.
Exactly.
So the Daily Mail talk about a flood.
Exactly.
Yeah, literally, that's coming by 2050.
Can I just finish, Gulwali, with I mean, your story after you arrived in England is a tale of sort of you constantly defeating expectations. So firstly, they tried to tell you were 16 and you prove you were 13, and then you get to school and they say, oh, you'll never get anything, and you get all these, you force them that you're going to take GCSEs with the other kids, and you get all your GCSEs. I think you got 2 A's and a B at A level. Again, when they told you that you weren't going to get anything. So there's this constant sort of mismatch of expectations against an asylum seeker and the intelligence and hard work and grit of this man. And then in 2012, you end up bearing the Olympic torch through the streets of your adopted town. What was that like?
Great, I think it's a good question to ask. And I think for me, I have problem generally with the British society as such. They have low expectation of young people, particularly, for example, K-leavers. My university, Manchester, 40,000 students. 5 of us up to 40,000 are K-leavers because there is no aspiration. They're like, oh, if you're a K-leaver, then you wouldn't go to university. Schools in places like they demotivate you. And I was like, no, I'm not having this. I was the only person in my math, science, English class, not prizing myself, but the only person who got a C or above. People who were born here, they didn't, because there was no high expectation from them. They were not pushed hard enough, or they didn't appreciate the opportunities, and that they just took it as for granted. And that was my problem. But with things with the Olympic torch, I think it was amazing to see that. And that's actually another reason why people want to come to Britain, is this idea of, they will be treated fairly. They will be treated with justice. And to some extent, it's true. I think to a lot of extent, it's true. And I think this. I love this. I mean, I travel to Europe like quite a lot. Yesterday and Sunday when I arrived to Manchester Airport, the Home Office official was asking me why I travel so much and why I have been having so many stamps from London. So I've been traveling a lot and seeing the rest of Europe. Now, thankfully, I have the chance to travel. Amazing. Britain is an amazing place in terms of multiculturalism, in terms of diversity, and we need to keep it up. So when I was, all of the community work I was doing, all of the youth activism, campaigning, and youth representation work I was doing, and I was given the chance to have a voice, which was something that I never had. As a young boy back in Afghanistan, you have to shut up if the older people speaking, even though if they're talking rubbish, you have to shut up because you're young. But in Britain, I had this chance to sit around the table with Michael Gove, to sit around the table with secretaries of states, to meet the Prime Minister, and to talk about youth policies, not only refugees issues, but talk about global stuff. And there's 4 things I'm very proud of. To carry the Olympic torch, I was recognized for my contribution in community work and to get into the University of Manchester, which I never thought it will happen, that I get into such an institutions, or any university in fact, because I was struggling with my studies. And then to speak at TEDx Manchester, I was given the chance to speak at TEDx, which was great. And then to write the book, but also my school recently named an award after me. It's called Gulwali Passarlay Award for Overcoming Adversity. And it makes me proud, the fact that I was only there in that school for 2 years. Every year they invite me to be a guest of honor, to present awards and certificates, and then to have an award after me is the legacy that I want. This was the kind of legacy that I wanted to leave. Not only did I want to get a good GCSEs and get 8 A to Cs, but also make sure that I have this legacy. But carrying the Olympic torch was once a lifetime opportunity, and I'm forever grateful that I was one of the 8,000 people to carry it. I'm going to take it with me back to Afghanistan, put it in the museum. This will be the only one there, and. So yeah, it was incredible, to see people on the street cheering you on, and it was great. It was a great experience. I wouldn't forget the day. It was 23rd June 2012. It was in Burnley, so not really in Bolton, but about 45 minutes drive. And I went with my foster family that took me there, which was great. And I really felt, the sense of my adopted home. I felt that it truly was the day, and again that I have not failed my mother, and I have continued to do my best.
Well, it's an inspiring story, the lightless sky, an Afghan refugee boy's journey of escape to a new life in Britain, Gulwali, Passarlay, with Nadine Gurian. Thank you very much to the parents. Wonderful.